Hey there, welcome back to Farmcraft. Finally got some time. We're going to tear this thing apart and see what's going on inside this Powerhead. Let's get through all the stuff we've already seen before. I'm going to get the gas tank off and everything, take the carb off, and we'll get down to the guts of it. Well, this doesn't bode well. I just wanted to take the wires off, so I figured, oh, I'll pop that head bolt out, take this bracket off of here, and that bolt is either broken off or stripped, one or the other. I'm really surprised that that did that. I really didn't wrench on it that hard. It's strange, it still turns with resistance, but it's not coming out anymore. Casualty already. I guess that just means I have more time to play with my Johnson. Okay. Alright, let's go ahead and take the intake off. And we should see some reed valves behind there. So carburetor goes into here. So this is our intake, which is clean. This is clean, that's the intake. And then this is exhausts, and this is where it's all cruddy. So, looks fine. You can see the rings. There's 3 rings on the piston there. So these ports are the intake, and these are the exhaust. Now remember, the intake goes into the crankcase down here and gets pressurized to then move around the bypass, which is on the other side, into the top of the cylinder above the piston. So when the piston, we're looking at the bottom one, when it's going down, it is pressurizing the crankcase. So you hear it? And can you see it? Like I hear the pressure, and I see bubbles right there. And what I'm surprised about is I do not see any reed valves in here at all. I've cleaned this up as well, and there's no valves in it. So the only valve is the piston moving. And I'm pretty surprised to see that. But then again, like I said, I'm not a 2-stroke mechanic, so maybe this isn't that unusual. Alright, I'm afraid to take any more head bolts off because I'm afraid of the consequences, but we got to do it. Boy, I'm afraid all of these bolts are going to be a nightmare. There's one. This is aluminum. The block and the head, I'm pretty sure, are aluminum. Non-magnetic. See what heat does. I was thinking that was going to mess up the paint really quickly, but it did not. So let's see. Hey, look at that. Heat is going to be my friend. If that didn't work, the next thing I was going to try was to rattle it some with an air hammer. Just take an air hammer on it and agitate it, try to break some of that corrosion loose. Man, they look terrible. It still doesn't feel great. There's our head gasket. There's my broken bolt. It's actually a stud. That bodes well. I might be able to just get that out of there without too much trouble. Look at how much junk is in the water jacket. I guess it's not that bad. Water would certainly still flow. There's a thin piece of metal right there. Wonder what that's for. Maybe like a heat shield. What I see is not too bad, but it definitely could use some work. That cylinder wall there is clean. That's not like a bunch of oil on it or anything. I've wiped it off. And you can see the vertical lines in it. And the entire cylinders, the entire surface of both cylinders looks like that. And certainly that's not how it's supposed to look. So I think what I have, I just need to hone my cylinders, put new rings in it, and I think we're going to see a big improvement. Let's look at the other one. At first I thought all this crud was like totally built up in there, but it turns out most of this is just, there's cavities that are irregular in shape, and the crud really isn't that deep. Still good to get in here and get it cleaned out so that the water can flow better, but I doubt this was restricting much. Overall, I'd say that head looks pretty good. Now, do you see that broken head bolt? Can I get it out? Oh baby, is it moving? It sure is. Thought I was going to have to drill that out when I broke it off. That is a beautiful thing. Alright, I'm not really sure if I should take the power head off now, which is just, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, I think 5 fasteners. I could then lift that off. But then that thing's going to be hard to handle, and I've got all these other fasteners to undo. So I'm going to go ahead and loosen or take those off as much as I can while it's being held like this. Makes it a little easier to work on. And I'm not using an impact just in case anything requires too much force. I don't want to break anything else off. I got lucky on that one. Don't push your luck. Voila! That is really quite amazing to me. These are just bronze bushings for seals. Alright, now one thing I want to do is make sure I put everything back exactly how it is. So this is the top, this is the intake, and I'm going to label this one T for top, and then B for bottom. And then I'm going to reach down and put a T on the piston itself. and a B. You can kind of see, so there's a flat piece of metal underneath the cap screw, and tab is bent so that the screw can't unscrew, which of course is a good idea, but now I need to unbend it to get it apart, and I'm probably going to break it. That's fine, I could always make something. There's that tab I was talking about. So hopefully I can unscrew that now. Oh yeah. Maybe I just go ahead and take that piston out. And they were certainly not stuck. They are very loose. All right, let's get this next one off. And just go ahead and lift out the crankshaft now, complete with a part number. Now, if this was a more modern engine and a more critical engine, I would be looking to be able to mic these dimensions and get specs. But I don't think I'm going to be able to get those for this engine. Really what I'm trying to do here is increase compression. There was not a lot of play in anything down here. These bronze bushings look okay. So I'm not planning on at this point really doing much of anything with this. Just going to clean everything up and get it back together properly after I get new rings and hone the cylinders. You can see a lot of lines in the direction of travel. Clean the carbon off the top, which isn't a problem. You could just leave it there, really. The wrist pin has very little play in it. It feels good. And everything's well lubricated down here. I'm pretty happy with what I'm seeing. So it's cool to really be able to see it all. So again, this is the intake and exhaust side. So here's our intakes down here. So the carburetor was sitting out here. When the piston goes up, creates a negative pressure in here, and it pulls the carburetor output into the crankcase. Then when the piston starts going down, these ports get covered up and it pressurizes down here in the crankcase, and the crankcases are independent of each other so that each one can be positive pressure when it needs to be. So that piston comes down, this reaches high pressure, and when it gets low enough, the piston goes below these ports here, which are the bypass ports. And if that's not making sense to you, I did a video on this, I'll leave a link. The increased pressure in the crankcase then goes up through here, through the bypass, and comes through those ports, and that's how it gets to the top of the cylinder. So then the piston starts going back up, it's compressing, and there's nowhere for it to go. The head's here and the spark plug's here, so it compresses, it fires, drives the piston back down, and then it goes out the exhaust. Why doesn't it go out the bypass? Well, because as that piston is going down, it's generating a positive pressure in the crankcase. So the exhaust is just open to atmosphere. So this is the lowest pressure place for it to go, and that's where it's going to go. The exhaust port is also slightly higher than the bypass. So the really high pressure, most of it's out of the exhaust before the bypass even gets opened, if that makes any sense. Everything happens in the right order. It's all by where these holes are drilled and how everything is designed. Very clever, and I'm really surprised there's not a reed valve to be had in this thing. Couldn't be much simpler. All right, I need some parts. I need piston rings, a head gasket, and I need to hone these cylinders. See you back when I can make that happen. They make something called a ring spreader for that, but I don't have one, so it works. Been using this stuff to clean up all the areas that have carbon deposits. It's working really well. Just want to see if I can measure any difference in thickness. 68. 68. Check the other one. That one's 67. 68. And that one's 69. Because of course it is. Alright, let's see what our new ones measure. It's just under 70. Yep, just under 70. Okay, well there's obviously some wear in the rings. I'm curious what the ring gap is. So these rings have a little step on them. That is to make room. There's a little prominence on the piston that keeps the ring aligned where it should. But what I'm checking is once you've compressed the ring into the cylinder, there's a space between the two ends. It should be pretty small once it's in position. So I'm going to put one of these rings in the cylinder. Up here on this part of the cylinder, there is almost no gap at all. My smallest feeler gauge is 1.5 thou. It would not go in there. But the thing is, that's not where the wear occurs. You know, this is all the way at the top. The piston's barely even rubbed there at all. I need to come down right by the ports. That's where the majority of the wear occurs. So let me use the piston to push it down. So I'm right at the top of the ports, and yeah, that gap is definitely wider now. I should be able to get a feeler gauge in that. So the way this works, you use feeler gauges, which are just pieces of metal that are specific dimensions down to the thousandth of an inch, and you find the one that will slide with a little bit of resistance in that gap. In my case, it was between 8 and 9 thousandths in dimension, and thankfully the specification is somewhere between 5 and 15 thousandths. So I was well within spec. So here's the piston, and you can see it's got a little nipple sticking out here and here. You know, because of course my Johnson has nipples. And another one there. So that keeps the rings so that the gap's going to be on one side, the next groove down it's going to be 180 opposite, and the next groove down it's again going to be 180 opposite. And that keeps those aligned. And that's what the little step in the ring is for, so that that nipple has a place to live. So let's get these rings installed. So that one's oriented that way, the other one goes this way, or the next one. And there's no difference in any of these rings. They're all the same. There's no like oil ring or up or down or anything. They're just square, simple rings. Square profile. Probably rectangular, not square. You know what I mean. Shut up. All right, there's one. Now right now those rings won't stay put, they're free to rotate, but once they get compressed into the cylinder, it's not going to be able to get past that protrusion there. I'll just have to be careful when I'm putting them in to make sure that they're lined up right. So this is a nice flat fine grit diamond stone, and with a little WD-40 I am taking the high spots off of the head, and I will do the same on the block. Doesn't look great, but it's nice and smooth. I'm happy with that. And what has been taking so long was this thing. This is a 2-inch, these are 1 15/16, so that will work. I have one of the ones with the 3 stones that go out and hone your cylinder wall, The problem is those tend to catch on these ports, and I don't want to damage anything. Buzzing in there with a drill and you catch on the port and the stone breaks off and suddenly you got a big gouge in your cylinder wall. Let's not do that. So these are safer. They're not going to do anything with the ports, but I had to wait a long time for this to arrive. I guess supply chain. 240 grit. It's not super abrasive. I'm going to put some 2-cycle oil in there while I'm doing it. This is really what's going to make the difference on the compression in this engine. Well, the rings too, but this is the other half of that solution. Yeah, see that there? Ooh, I can even feel that one. So I need to hone these out and get all those vertical lines basically out of there. You want to replace that with as close to 45 as you can get crosshatch. Here's some 2-cycle engine oil. Oops. And let me do the other side. Okay, I think we might be done. Alright, so I can just barely feel a couple of the vertical lines. It's not as bad as it was, but I'm going to hone just a little bit more. Well, it's really much better than it was. It's not perfect, and you know, you can't really get them perfect with this kind of hone. You need like a real honing machine that can actually hone it to a specific size. This is really scratching the walls, but if the walls aren't true, if it's not a true circle anymore, it's going to stay that way. There, I think you can see that crosshatch pattern now, and it feels nice and smooth. I don't feel any of the vertical lines. There's a couple, like right here you can see one, right there, but there's nothing to feel. So I'm not worried about that. I think in order to get all those vertical lines to where you can't even see them, I would have to take way too much off with this ball hone. You know, on camera I think that crosshatch, it looks like it's really scratched up, but that feels perfectly smooth. You don't feel any of that. So now this block is full of grinding dust from the ball hone. So I am going to take this up to my utility sink and I'm going to wash it to death. Okay, so here it is all cleaned up. Fresh white paper towel. Still comes out white. It took quite a bit of work actually to get to this point. But you don't want any of that grit left in there because that's just going to eat up your freshly honed cylinder walls and your new rings if you don't get it out. So I decided to check my ring gap again after honing. And I'm getting probably between 9 and 10 thousandths. And before it was between 8 and 9, so I've added a thousandth or so to the ring gap. All right, something else I'm going to do. I'm really hoping these are going to be close enough that I'm not going to have to do anything with them, but I want to check the clearance I have on my connecting rods there. Once the cap is on and everything's torqued to spec, this is going to be slightly larger than that journal right there, so that it's free to rotate and that some oil can get in there to lubricate it. So, you know, you put that together, how do you measure that? That's a tough thing to measure. Well, actually, it's pretty easy because some clever people have come up with this stuff. This is called Plastigauge, and basically there's a little tiny thread of plastic in here. See that little green thread of plastic? And we're going to use that to measure this, and I'll show you how. It's actually quite easy. I'm going to cut a little length that'll go across that journal. And I am going to put just a dab of grease on here to hold that Plastigauge in place. There, so now that's straight across the journal. So now I want to put this on and torque it to spec. Now I don't want the Plastigauge right on the joint there, but right there will be just fine. Putting it on exactly how it was, which is just like this. Okay. we go. All right, so they are both torqued to spec. So now we're gonna take it back apart and see what our plastic gauge looks like. And that allows us to tell the clearance inside there when it's torqued down. There's really no other way to measure that. Okay. That little ribbon of plastic spread out that much. Well, then you use the markings on this to tell you how big it is. It's between 1.5 and 2 thousandths. Cool little system. That's a very hard measurement to do, but some clever people came up with this and made it easy. So you can see it's wider than the 2 thousandths, which the wider it is, the less clearance there is. And 2 thousandths is the upper limit of my spec, so I'm within spec. Awesome. So when those feel nice and smooth, I am going to leave those alone. I don't want to take anything off of it and get out of spec with my clearances. You know, if that gets out of spec, then it becomes loose every time it's rotating. It's actually clunking. It can cause a knock if it gets bad enough. The only thing I see on this, for some reason, this crankshaft journal here mates with this bronze bearing. Feels a little bit rough, so that one I might just very lightly hit with a stone just to kind of take any high spots off. On second thought, I'm just going to take a little bit of Scotch-Brite here and just smooth it out. This bearing's been working fine. I don't want to do anything to jeopardize it. This is hardened, whereas the push rod and the cap are not. So yeah, I'm here on camera polishing my hard crank. Yeah, I wonder what did that. I almost think I'm feeling low spots, and I bet you that this got dinged up when it was originally put together, because the bearing itself looks fine, the bronze part on both halves. And if it is depression and not like something sticking up, then all it's going to do is carry oil. It's not going to really hurt anything. And since the bearing looks okay, I suspect that's the case, so I'm probably being too anal. But I couldn't work on my Johnson and not at least polish my crank a little bit. Right, it is time to start putting things back together finally. So I'm going to take some 2-cycle oil and put it in the cylinders. Now I just recently cleaned everything here. These are all nice and clean, dust-free, grit-free. You don't want dust and grit down inside after you've done all this work. When I took these pistons out, I labeled them. So this goes in like that. I gotta get my rings aligned with the pins, which is like that. So I'm gonna do this by hand. I'm not gonna use a ring compressor. On a small piston like this with these small rings, that's easy to do. Now I am gonna have to kind of work and push on these rings to get them in. So rather than using like a screwdriver or some piece of metal, I've got these wooden dowels that I'm going to use. That's not going to scratch anything. So this one goes in like this. And we're going to do it one ring at a time, basically. That one just went in. Now I'm going to be looking at the other ring to make sure it stays in the right spot. There we go. And the gap looks good. And that piston is in. You see those nice new rings down in there? Now let's do the other side. And there we go. Now we can look at putting the crankshaft back in. But you want to make sure that you get some oil in here, because when you first start up, you'd be running dry for quite a while. Not good for your engine. So this one goes just like that. Alright, I am just giving them a little hand snug and trying to make sure that I've got them lined up well on the edges. Start taking these back up. Well, no, it didn't totally lock it up. Alright, let's get this other cap around here. They look like they are lined up really well. I have some Permatex anaerobic gasket maker. When you're putting a crankcase together, in my experience, there's not usually a gasket there because that's going to change your clearances on these journals right here. So you need basically no space between these parts. What this gasket maker does is it's going to squeeze out. It will fill any low points, any imperfections, but will pretty much not leave any spacing in between the two metal surfaces. Alright, I am ready to close this up, and hopefully I will never see the inside of this again. Not hitting it very hard, just a tappy tap tap. So I'm going to start at the center. I'm just going to basically do like that. These are 144 inch-pounds. So okay. I can hear the suction in the crankcase, and it feels really good. Turning smooth. Awesome. I'm going to go ahead and put it back on the stem. A lot easier to work on it that way than on the bench. There it goes. Yep, just had to get the splines lined up. You know, that's different. I'm going to have to compare that to previously, but do you hear the there? There. That is crazy. crankcase pressure going through the bypass. And I'm pretty sure that it's more than it was before. So that's pretty cool. And here you can see the pistons doing their thing. Click. So I got a new head gasket and I stoned the surface. It's nice and smooth. This doesn't look too bad. The head itself feels okay, but I mean it really has some significant machining marks in it. And I'm a little reluctant to just trust the gasket. I'm thinking about using this this sealant on it. Here's my new head gasket. Put some sealant there, just a thin coat, and then you do the same on the opposite side. You let them dry and then you assemble. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of differing opinions on this. Now, I think with a modern gasket, you know, the manufacturers don't recommend using any sealant. I don't think it's necessary. Some people still do. It probably works fine. For this, these old gaskets, a lot of them, they did recommend sealant. And I think a lot of what I'm seeing on here is remnants of sealant from when it was originally assembled. So I'm going to use sealant. All right, we are ready to put the head back on. All right, so I've just got two in here just to hold it in place. Those are going to come back out though, because I want to put sealant on these threads. Service manual actually specs this. And you know, that stuff that I was calling corrosion when I took this apart may very well have been sealant caked in the threads. So I'm using the same sealant. It's just this Forma Gasket Aviation 3. It also is made for threads. And I'm just going to put that on each bolt. And now this is the one that I broke off because it holds this bracket and the magneto, which I'm just going to set on top for now. That feel super tight. Okay. Low speed back in. So this is always hard to show. This little linkage here gets actuated when you move the speed control. It pushes it down, and then when you slow it down, it comes up. That attaches on the carburetor to this right here, which is the throttle. So I basically just have to put that in and put a little piece of wire which acts like a cotter pin. Alright, so I was just getting ready to put the plugs in, but curiosity won't let me. I want to see what the compression is. Now, I don't really expect this compression to be very good, because what I've done is put a crosshatch on the cylinder walls, put in new rings. They need to run for a while and wear in, and we haven't done that yet. If I check the compression now and you know, really give them a chance to wear in, and then we'll check it again. Alright, let's see what we get. $64, $65. So I would say, you know, basically we're unchanged right now. So let's finish putting this thing together and see if we can get it started. Alright, so we're all ready to start this thing. Ah, crap. We got a fire. So I'd love to tell you that it started on the first pull and purred like a kitten, but I'd be lying. It was actually a bear to start. It's definitely harder to pull, which makes sense. You know, things need to wear in a little bit, and I might be getting better compression. So I ended up taking the pull starter off and using a drill until I could get this thing running. So here we are after idling for an hour. It already seems to be running better. Works. So wouldn't you know it, this drill that I've been using to do the compression died, so I can't use that. But I had compared it to using the pull starter and found that I was getting the same results. So I'm just going to use the pull starter. What do we got there? That's almost 90. That's 85 psi. Look at that. That's better. Hard to pull too. Yeah, that went up to almost, it's just under 90. Well, that's pretty cool. Let's do the other cylinder. Right at 90. Definite improvement on compression. Hell yeah. Now, I wish I could tell you that this thing is now a dream and runs perfectly, but some of the running issues that I had previously are still there. I'm not sure if it is something worn out or if it's just a persnickety kind of engine. It's taken some time to realize that you really have to, you've got two screws here. You've got your high-speed screw right here that you adjust, and then you've got your low-speed screw here. And I have discovered that when I originally started, I have to open up the low-speed screw, maybe even close the high a little bit, and do a lot of pumping on the primer, get it running. Once it's warmed up, if it stalls, I have to lean it out. I have to close the low-speed screw. And when it's running full throttle, I constantly have to adjust this high-speed screw. It doesn't want to just pick a spot and stick with it. So it's an old persnickety engine. That's my conclusion. I don't know what else I could do to it. I've been through everything. Everything is clean. Yeah, I mean, if somebody knows something else that maybe I'm forgetting, it would be cool to get this thing running a little better. But either way, I mean, it works. I mean, this is a 1952 engine. How old is that thing? This is 2022, so it's 70 years old. And it still works. You know, I can still cruise around the pond with it. So I'm pretty happy with that. Had a lot of fun tearing this thing down and doing a total rebuild on it. Pretty cool stuff, and really neat to really tear into a two-stroke. I haven't done that before, and I hope you guys learned something. I certainly did on this project. Now, this is the part of the video where I tell you, do not subscribe to this channel. In fact, if you have subscribed, I want you to unsubscribe. Do not leave any comments below, and whatever you do not share this video with anybody. We'll see you on the next one. Take it easy. You know, if you watched all of the first video and then you watch all of this one, you'll have watched me working on my Johnsons for over an hour straight. Yeah, it's shooting some out. So I've been having a blast working on my Johnson in front of you guys. So here we are at the end of the video. Keep your Johnson in a vise. You'll have watched me working on my Johnson. Damn it!